Hello and welcome to CXO Bytes, a podcast brought to you by the Green Software Foundation and dedicated to supporting chiefs of information, technology, sustainability, and AI as they aim to shape a sustainable future through clean software. We will uncover the strategies and a big green move that's helped drive results for business and for the planet. I am your host, Sanjay Podder. Welcome to another episode of CXO Bytes, where we bring you unique insights into the world of sustainable software development from the view of the C-suite. I am your host, Sanjay Podder. Today's guest brings a rare blend of entrepreneurial spirit, tech savvy, and sustainability leadership. Eric Gertsman is the Director of Technology Sustainability at Salesforce, where he's helping shape the future of green IT from data center planning and infrastructure strategy to carbon accountability. Before Salesforce, Eric co-founded a company that built solar-powered artisan travel trailers, talking about walking the talk. He's also been a passionate advocate for ethical capitalism and the role of business as a platform for change. Eric, welcome to the show. Kindly introduce yourself.
Thanks, Sanjay. I appreciate you having me on. Excited to be here. Yes, I'm the Director of Tech Sustainability at Salesforce. As the title indicates, right, I focus on Salesforce's cloud infrastructure, which is a bedrock of the company. And it's one of the first companies to embrace this infrastructure as a service model. So it's a very interesting view that the company's had over the years on infrastructure. I focus on decarbonizing our co-location and hyperscale data centers in this wildly changing industry, right? Most recently with the rise of AI, but every decade presents wild new challenges. I also pay attention to our water footprint, our waste footprint, and a number of other areas. So excited to talk to you today.
Wonderful. Some great topics we will get insights from you on. So looking forward to this conversation, Eric. So, Eric, let's start with your journey. You have worn many hats: marketing, consulting, startup founder, and now sustainability leader at one of the world's biggest tech companies. What inspired your transition into green tech, and how did you select this role and your current work at Salesforce?
Well, I think the one word answer, the meaning. I'm not the type of person that checks in and checks out very well for a paycheck. I really need to focus on things that are positively contributing to humanity. So way back, almost 2 decades ago, I thought long and hard about what my career was going to look like and realized that I wanted to focus on changing the world really from the inside out, incrementally moving organizations towards more sustainable, more efficient, more responsible activities. And, obviously over the last 20 years, well, while that may sound sexy, right, it happens in smaller, seemingly mundane chunks where, it's one spreadsheet at a time or one case study or a meaningful meeting or a data source or something that, you make incremental change and could have pretty wide effects. But yeah, I mean, I can certainly talk about for younger people how to do it, but really just to keep pushing and keep learning. Whether you're in a company, you want to do intrapreneurship to do more on the sustainability side and broaden your scope to have a bigger impact. Whether you're in school and you want to look at the right classes and projects and case competitions and whatever, keep pushing hard because there's plenty out there to find. And all of that set me up for a path over the last 6 years at Salesforce to have really good impact. And I will say my time here actually has not just been sustainability. In fact, a lot of it has been around data center planning, infrastructure strategy, FinOps, which has given me a much richer picture of what the company is and what it really means to do sustainability work. So I'd welcome other people to bring cross-functional capabilities to the field.
No, I think you bring up a very good point on the cross-functional, capabilities, because to to green the tech, you need to understand the underlying tech very well, right? Because in some sense, the greening of tech is building a tech which is much more efficient, as bringing in some of the best practices. So I think all the past experience you had really enables you to now deliver on the promise of green tech. So that's fantastic. I'm sure a lot of our young people are interested to do a career here. So these are great points. So Eric, last year, I remember Salesforce released the Business Guide to Carbon Accounting, which breaks down how companies can measure and reduce their greenhouse gas emission. Why is carbon accounting so central to corporate sustainability today? And how are you implementing these principles inside Salesforce's own infrastructure operations?
Yep. Great question. And thanks for pointing out that resource. It's a good resource. Your listeners can go to our website, download it, and I think you'll be providing links, I think, to some of the stuff we're talking about here. So it's a good one. Yeah, I mean, carbon accounting, in the way I see it, right? We've all heard the old adage, you can't manage what you can't measure. I think that's never truer than it is in sustainability. Proper tracking is the precursor to pretty much everything. All programs aimed at identifying opportunities, implementing action, and determining results requires that. It's vital, right, for any sustainability organization. It's often new stuff. It has been, there's new ways. It's a little bit of art, a little bit of science. We obviously at Salesforce confirm things with third-party verification, but sometimes bring in our own sources and our own methodologies and make sure everything is strong and well devised. I also want to take an opportunity, I think, because a part of, for me, carbon accounting is not just the sort of the back-looking after the fact accounting. I think a lot of it is the forward-looking target setting, which I think is a big part of, I think, what this world of data and data tracking and sustainability really is. And so, at Salesforce, one of our biggest North Stars is science-based targets. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that term, they're long-term corporate goals that are aligned to keeping the globe warming at no more than 1.5 degrees centigrade, which, of course, is an enormous goal and, quite frankly, maybe impossible today. But leading companies truly do have to think about our future, and we need to be ambitious. We need to push for where we need to be. As you mentioned, our founder and CEO, Mark Benioff, has always said, I think you mentioned that it's a platform for change. Business is a platform for change. And it's been embedded in our culture a variety of different ways. Because, as the world shifts and as politics the winds shift around, it's about corporate leadership. I think that's going to really pave the way. And so by setting these goals, I think is one real important way for us to stay laser focused on what we need to do as a society from the business perspective. And there are a lot of different ways how to do this, right? To set different scopes and using different metrics. And there's ways to engage, right? The Science Based Target Institute is one organization that can help, but there's many pathways to doing this. We set an aggressive 2040 goal with interim 2030 goals, focused on scope 1 and 2, totally carbonization, and in scope 3, intensity reduction. And so it looks a little different for everyone, but I think that's super important because as the company has multiple priorities, right? We don't want sustainability to be a nice to have, but a need to have, and that other priorities don't swamp it or dissolve it at the first chance because they're not as they don't have as hard and fast as the targets and objectives as other groups.
Yeah, and when we started the Green Software Foundation, one of the mission was to see how we can reduce emission from the IT sector in line with the Paris Agreement. And things like carbon accounting is so critical there because, as you rightly mentioned, you can only reduce what you can measure, right? And bringing the emission from IT central to the way organizations are trying to address their net zero goals, right? Meet their net zero goals. I guess what you are really doing in Salesforce is a very good example of what successful organizations do. We have seen studies that point to the fact that successful organizations in their industry they integrate sustainability in their tech strategy. And that also ends up with better shareholder value. So it's win-win for all. And I think what you're doing are great examples for people to learn from. Eric, I think it was just a couple of months back, I saw the announcement of AI Energy Score. And as you know, this year in the Green Software Foundation, one of our big focus is sustainable AI, green AI. How do you reduce the environmental impact of AI? So I really liked what you announced. And I wanted to go a little deeper with you on the AI Energy Score. What was your thinking behind it? And, how did you come together with Hugging Face and many such organizations to create something very tangible for people to rank the emissions from AI? What is your vision going forward? So if you can just educate us a little bit on the AI Energy Score and point us to the right set of resources to learn more.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's actually an interesting time for AI. Obviously, everyone points to the fact that we're going to be seeing a lot of energy increases, and that very well may be the case. We're seeing a lot of demand. It remains to be seen whether we're going to see a doubling, a tripling. Who knows what we're going to see in the industry from an increase there. But I'm thankful that many of us are paying attention much more today than we did 20, 30 years ago, the rise of sort of the internet. I mean, people are laser focused on the fact that this will have an impact, and we have to get in front of it early as opposed to later when a lot of things are going to be baked and much more difficult. So we did collaborate with Hugging Face, Cohere, Carnegie Mellon University to develop the AI Energy Score. And that's a standardized framework for measuring and comparing AI model energy efficiency, which scores a bunch of different inference tasks, right? Like text generation, image generation, summarization, and gives them a 1 to 5 star rating, right? With 5 being the most efficient. And you were focusing on the inference energy side here because it obviously presents a very complex challenge with a wide array of variables, hardware for configurations, model optimizations, deployment scenarios, usage patterns. And so we're aiming at addressing these by establishing like standardized benchmarks, which will ultimately, I think, help developers and all users identify, choose more sustainable models, and eventually create this sort of like energy label paradigm, right, for their model scoring. Right now I think we're evaluating 166 models, including a few of Salesforce's own models. But the idea is that with more transparency and more ranking, I think you can get folks to understand sort of where they stack up and how they can refocus in on sustainability, given sort of the visible nature of it. Salesforce's aim, just to spend one more second on it, is to create these smaller language models that are optimized for our use cases, right? Accurate, reliable tasks without using just so much energy on these enormous models that just aren't relevant to our use case. So I think we're going to start to see that kind of trend more and more going forward.
Yeah, and I think that's a great strategy because smaller the model, less is the energy it uses, right? So you don't necessarily need to go to the largest of the model for all your tasks.
Yep.
That's a great strategy. And I think the AI energy scores will be a very, good benchmark for further research on this topic to see, what are the great strategies, which are the good models to deploy in an organization. So you've definitely raised the bar here. That's great. Eric, you have been thinking beyond emission. You have also been thinking about impact to other resources in the environment, like water. Tell me more about what you are doing in that space. How do you think one can manage that impact? Your plan for Salesforce?
Yeah, thanks. I think water is a big deal, and it's something that's become I think a major factor for us to start considering in the sustainability realm globally, but certainly at Salesforce. I've got a lot of thoughts on it. I mean, I think as a species in general, we've just been treating it as an unending resource forever, and it's clearly not. And in even sustainability circles, we're not really paying as much attention to water and haven't, because carbon has been such a momentous issue, and climate change. And sometimes, obviously, there's perceived or real trade-off between energy and carbon, right? With some cooling systems like evaporative cooling that actually are more efficient from a carbon perspective if they use more water. And so sometimes this tension there, and that's why I think it's sort of not been always fully appreciated. I think the equation, especially between the trade-off I was talking about, but just the focus on water really starts to change when we start talking about water-stressed regions in particular. And you could look at the resources online, WRI, maybe put that in our resource link list here. But every geographic area in the world has a number, which is how much withdrawals they're getting per the full aquifer in that area. And if it's a high percentage year over year, even though there's some recharge, it still presents a tremendous amount of risk. And so these are areas where if you have a data center resource there, you have to be very, very mindful. Why? Again, keeping it the 100,000 foot level is like 2 to 3 billion people live in these water constrained areas, right? And I think it's like 20 to 40% of the world's food are cultivated in these areas. So if you start depleting these aquifers and putting pressure on populations and agriculture, whatever, you're going to disrupt humans in a very profound way that will cause serious environmental and social and economic and political issues. And so the data industry has to be really mindful of how they think about that. It also has, coming down to more like 10,000 feet, business risks that are pretty salient to companies, whether you're a co-location company, or you're a hyperscale company, or you're a tenant in one of these types of data centers. Putting residents or agriculture, putting pressure on them is not a great way to build community relations. And that's a big topic that has been happening over the last 5 years, where community bridge building is one of the big efforts made by sort of the data center industry to work in their local communities. And so being aware is really, and being proactive is really important there. Operational disruption, when you have water cooled systems and you can no longer access water, either for physical constriction or political reasons, you're going to have serious trouble. You're not going to cool your data centers, and they will literally melt down. And that may not happen today, right? It may not happen tomorrow or next year. It may happen further in the future. It's also worth noting that the power sector operates with a lot of water. Most thermal power plants, coal, natural gas, nuclear, use millions and millions of gallons a day. So again, if the water runs out, aquifers run out, you're not going to have power to power your data center. So it's an area that we're not really paying attention to, but it's an area that we need to think about. So, how can we avoid this? Just to kind of put a more than a rosier picture on it a little bit, is of course avoiding water stress regions, right? Ones that are deemed high or very high on the WRI scale that I mentioned earlier. It may not always be possible. There are data residency drivers that a lot of customers expect. There's embedded, current regions that have a lot of data center infrastructure. We realize it's not going to happen overnight, but if you're a company like us thinking about going into a new continent or a new sort of sector, thinking about where the water constraints are, I think is really important. And that's like areas like the US Southwest, Western Europe, Singapore, India, the Middle East, paying attention. And if you do site there, make sure you have proper cooling systems that are being used, right? Closed loop systems wherever possible, air side economization, liquid cooling for chips, even hybrid systems using recycled water, things like that. And also consider projects for aquifer recharge and wetland restoration and watershed retention, which, by the way, can also help with fire risk too, which is another big factor as climate change increases for our data center environments. And then just disclose your withdrawals, your consumption, your discharge. That's an important way to show the impact over time.
I'm glad that you brought out the aspect of water dependency in power generation? Because typical conversations are limited to cooling, right? But there is a
Absolutely.
lot of water required during power generation, which does pose an operational risk if you are not able to ensure that water supply. Uh, One question that comes to my mind is similar to the carbon accounting solution you have provided, I guess, through your net zero cloud solution platform.
Mm.
Is there anything that addresses the water problem in a much more comprehensive way?
We do have the opportunity within our net zero cloud platform to track water and to manage it in the same way as carbon. So it's absolutely within that paradigm. That's a great tool. I'm glad you mentioned that. It actually the product rose out of our internal efforts to use Salesforce's own software to do carbon accounting for ourselves, which is really cool. And we got so good at it that we said, hey, let's productize this and sell it to customers because we think it'd be valuable to them. And today, many big companies, Accenture, CVS, Bank of America, NBC, like a lot of big names are using that tool to, as a central resource for managing their carbon accounting. And actually, the roadmap is going to continue enhancing for this product, where we're Salesforce. So AI and agentic capabilities are kind of part of our strong ethos today. And so it's going to get really fun where we start applying AI onto the data we're getting within Net Zero Cloud so that we can do more in that area, opportunity identification and a variety of things that I think are going to be really, really useful to sustainability.
Wonderful. Eric, you talked about Salesforce culture, how sustainability isn't just a department. It's woven into the company's DNA. You have science-based targets as well as 1.5 degrees Celsius reduction as your company's North Star. How do you keep the culture alive across global teams? And how do you balance compliance with the deeper business case for sustainability?
Yeah, good question. Let me start by saying one of the things that Salesforce did 26 years ago at its founding was establish the 1-1-1 model. And that's a model that means employees collectively devote 1% of their time to volunteering. The company gives 1% of its revenues to philanthropy, and we donate 1% of our product to nonprofits and other institutions. And clearly that all isn't focused necessarily on sustainability, but it does create this ethos of doing the right thing and helping our community and helping our world. So it sort of sets a foundation that feeds into sustainability and ESG efforts within the company. But that said, right, sustainability still isn't easy. There are a lot of headwinds for all practitioners, I think, on in this function. And on the tech side, like I focus on, sustainability. I mean, executives have dozens of priorities, right? Profit margin targets and trust and reliability issues, AI integration, new product delivery. And we personally, on our company, are transitioning aggressively to public cloud from colo. So there's just a ton of priorities. Those are the big, broad categories. There's a lot of even smaller, more salient things that they have to think about. So it's hard to carve out headspace for sustainability, and much less dedicate the necessary resources to it. So it's important, obviously, for sustainability professionals to be clear and concise and creative, and but also, I think, part of your question is to align sustainability with other business priorities. My view is that corporate action, sustainability is not altruism. Sustainability is good business. By its very definition, it looks at the long-term viability of a company and the world and its community, everything else, which obviously is essential to the company's long-term success. So, and sometimes it involves short-term trade-offs, often not. Right. I'm a big fan of aligning sustainability with benefits like carbon savings being energy cost reduction and optimizing, our hardware or power and space infrastructure for, better capacity constraints, improving capacity constraints, and voluntary compliance with regulations before they come to pass, so you can avoid risks down the line. From a macro lens, you can point to sustainability positively supporting brand and sales and marketing efforts and employee recruitment and retention, innovation, right? It's hard to talk about those every day when you're talking about every sustainability initiative, but it's important that people remind themselves that sustainability does have business values. And many studies show that, right? There are a lot of claims within many reports that sustainability is good for business, whether you look at metrics like operational performance or profitability, return on equity, even just stock results. And obviously some of this may be correlation, right? But because the best companies do the right things. But I think there's a lot of causation to the topics I talked about, right? You do good sustainability work, and you get a lot of business benefits along the way. So I absolutely think it's a critical function in business.
Absolutely. Done the right way, sustainable tech, there is a very deep correlation between green ops and FinOps, right? So
yeah. Yep, exactly.
Yeah. So we have come to the end of our podcast episode, Eric. And it's been a pleasure having you on the show. Your work really captures what CXO Bytes is all about, moving from vision to implementation in a way that's practical, scalable, and deeply human. Thanks for your contribution, and we really appreciate you coming on to CXO Bytes. We'd also like to know from you how our audience can learn more about your work and the work that your organization is doing. So if you can also touch upon that.
Sure. Well, first, thanks, Sanjay, for having me. It was a real pleasure to speak to you. I keep up your great podcast. It's a fantastic thing. The way people can get a hold of me, probably the best way is through LinkedIn, and you can search for Eric Gertsman. I'd love to see and hear how you guys are impacting the world and your perspectives on sustainability. Regarding Salesforce, please go to salesforce.com/sustainability. You'll find a lot of resources there, a lot of case studies, a lot of articles, a lot of press releases, things like that you'll see about what we're doing in the industry, our stakeholder impact reports, things like that. I think that'd be a great place to start for a lot of folks.
Wonderful. So that's all for this episode of CXO Bytes. All the resources for this episode are in the show description below. And you can visit podcast.greensoftware.foundation to listen to more episodes of CXO Bytes. See you all in the next episode. Bye for now. Hey everyone, thanks for listening. Just a reminder to follow CXO Bytes on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcast. And please do leave a rating and review if you like what we are doing. It helps other people discover the show, and of course, we want more listeners. To find out more about the Green Software Foundation, please visit greensoftware.foundation. Thanks again, and see you in the next episode.